Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you that starting in January of 2024, videos in this series are no longer going to be posted on Now Let's Be Honest. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start posting those videos on a different YouTube channel, which I just launched, which is just called by my name, David Tate. So if you're wanting some more laid back, informal, long form content like the stuff that you've been watching right here on this channel, you can go to that channel and subscribe to it there, because I'm going to try to keep this channel, Now Let's Be Honest, more focused on the stuff that I explicitly made for YouTube. So if you're here for this type of Bible study thing, go to that channel, subscribe to that. That's where this stuff is going to be starting in January of 2024. That being said, let's get to the stuff you're actually here for. Father, I thank you for every single one of these people in this room with us tonight. As we go into your word, God, we're going to be talking about King Solomon, and we're going to see a paradoxing thing happen here, God, where we're going to see Solomon, who is paradoxically at the greatest success that he's ever been, but from the greatest success is born the greatest failure. And it just so happens that we're going through this, God, as we go into the Christmas season. And I think that this chapter will really highlight why we needed you to come in the flesh. Because even when you have the wisest man on earth as the king over your holy people, God, even they cannot accomplish what only you can do. And that's why we needed you to come. And so as we go into this chapter, God, may this chapter actually put us in the Christmas spirit more than all the Christmas songs that we hear on the radio or in the stores will do, God. Let this chapter right here teach us what it truly means to celebrate Christmas, because we're truly celebrating why it was so necessary for God to take on flesh and dwell with us to be our King. Prepare our hearts, God, for tonight. May your Spirit be present with us, guiding us in understanding. And by the end of this evening, may we be better equipped and shaped to go out and serve you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Here's the game plan for today. We were going to cover 1 Kings chapter 10 by itself, but as I was reading through it, I decided to change things up a little bit, and I actually want to cover 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 1 through chapter 11, verse 8. I want to get 8 verses into chapter 11, because really chapters 10 and 11 go hand in hand, right? Chapter 10, originally what I just called the chapter by itself was Solomon's fortunes, or I think it was maybe Solomon's riches and stuff like that. But really, that's not what the chapter's about. Right? Really, what we see here is that we've got this twofold story being told in this single chapter. On one hand, it is the story of King Solomon's fortunes, but on the other hand, on the other side of the same coin, it's the story of King Solomon's failure. And when you get to chapter 11, verse 9 through the end of chapter 11, we're going to see God confront Solomon about this failure, and he's going to promise the division of the kingdom. Right? And so that's what we'll talk about next week. But today, I really want to focus on this twofold aspect of it, right? And really, you have to go into chapter 11 in order to fully address that. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. And yeah, like honestly, these are just really sad chapters to me, right? We talked about this last week whenever Sean led us. Chapter 9 was a step in the sad direction, which like honestly, it's really hard to go better than chapter 8. Right? Because 1 Kings chapter 8 is where Solomon had dedicated the temple, and he's literally just praising God. Right? And it's one of the most amazing and powerful prayers, and we literally get to see the kingdom at its height. And from there, all it can do is go down. Like basically what we see in 1 Kings chapter 8 is we get to see the height that a human king can bring the kingdom of God to. Right? It is at the pinnacle. And so in chapter 9, it begins to go down. And in chapter 10, it's going to drastically fall down. But ironically, what we're going to see is that that's not what it's going to look like from a human perspective. From a human perspective, we are still building up. And things are going to look better and better and better from a physical perspective. And the main reason I'm trying to highlight that right now is because I think that I really want us to understand just the whole paradox that we have going on in this chapter. And I wrote this down on my phone because I wanted to word it correctly. There's an overall message that, like, I think that what we're going to see here is that this chapter is severely applicational, right? Because what we see in this chapter is something that the New Testament writers are going to talk about a whole lot, right? The fact that the wisdom of God is foolishness to men, and that the foolishness of God is wisdom to men, and that God uses the weak to shame the strong and the strong to shame the weak, right? This is what God will do. And what we're going to see here is that when Solomon is at the height of his worldly success, he also is at the height of his spiritual failure. His greatest folly comes at the height of his wisdom's successes, right? So the greatest act of folly that King Solomon ever commits happens and directly flows from the successes he accomplished through wisdom. What we're going to see here is that Solomon's wisdom never departs from him. Rather, his wisdom guides him into a place that leads to folly. And in this way, you can actually kind of view this story as almost a second fall, right? Like if you go back to the fall of man, like really, I mean, the whole Bible is like a series of falling of it, like the fall of man, right? We're basically just replaying the Garden of Eden story again and again and again. But you really get to see it happening here because if you go back to Genesis, what was the tree that they were not supposed to eat from?
The knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah, it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? It was associated with knowledge and wisdom, right? The reason why Eve ate the fruit is because she saw it and she thought it was desirable to make one wise, right? And what she did is she was grasping for wisdom that was beyond what God had intended for her, right? Because some people even speculate that maybe if they had walked in obedience, God would have eventually allowed them to eat from the tree. I don't know whether that's true or not. That's just speculative. But it makes sense, right? God was wanting to test their obedience and see whether they would trust him, and then maybe eventually they would have allowed him, like he would have allowed them to eat from it, right? But the whole point of the Garden of Eden story is that they were overstepping their bounds, right? It's not that they were trying to abandon wisdom. They were so eager to attain wisdom for themselves that their desire for wisdom led them to folly. Same thing with Solomon here, right? So that's what we're going to see in this chapter. And I'm just going to recap the context for us very briefly. We are in the United Monarchy of Israel, and we are at the height of it. By the end of this chapter, though, it's going to look like we're at the height of it, but really we're at the breaking point of it. We have seen King Saul reign over Israel, and he was not a great king. But then King David came after him, and he was a great king, right? He was a man after God's own heart. He wasn't perfect. He messed up, and a lot of his life was hardship. Some of that hardship was not a result of his own failures. Some of it was. But he goes down in the history books as a person who is faithful to Yahweh, even when he failed, right? And he repented, and he would get back on track, and he goes down in history as a good king. Solomon is the first king in the Davidic dynasty, right? So David is the first king, and then Solomon flows from David. He is the king that David appoints to be his heir, and we've been tracking with Solomon's reign since 1 Kings chapter 1, right? 1 Kings chapters 1 through 11 are Solomon's book, right? And we saw Solomon rise up to the throne, right? We saw David die in 1 Kings chapter 2. In chapter 3, Solomon asks God for a hearing heart, that he would be able to, go out and discern rightly how to lead the people. And we see that God faithfully provided for that. And so in the chapters that follow, chapters 4 and 5 in particular, we get to see Solomon turning the kingdom of God into something that seems to be the fulfillment of all the covenants, right? I mean, you have the Abrahamic covenant seemingly being fulfilled in Solomon. You have the Mosaic covenant seemingly being fulfilled in Solomon. You even have the creation mandate that God gave to man in Genesis chapter 1 seemingly being fulfilled in Solomon. And then you get to chapter 6 and Solomon begins to build a temple for God, right? And if you're just reading through this, it seems like Solomon he almost is this Messiah figure, right? He is the son of David who has come to create a place for God to dwell. And y'all know me, I've got those 7 words that I like to use to summarize the Bible. God's commitment to dwelling with man again. Amen. Right? That's what the story of the Bible is. And I love every time I do it, people start counting the words. They're like, ooh, 7 words. God's commitment to dwelling with man again. That's what the story of the Bible is. And so if you've been reading since Genesis, it seems like the story of the Bible is coming to its conclusion with Solomon here. And so he builds the temple. And when you get to chapters like 7 and 8, he dedicates the temple, and it's an amazing moment. And it really seems like the kingdom of God is being established. But if you've been a close reader of the text, you'll notice that there's some chinks in Solomon's armor, right? If you're just reading through it, it almost looks like Solomon's the Messiah. But the author has given us hints here and there to show us that maybe Solomon might not be the one who we think he is. Right? And by the time you get to the end of the section we're going to cover today, it's almost going to be like Obi-Wan yelling at Anakin in episode 3, "You were supposed to destroy the Sith, not join them." Right? That's going to be kind of what this is like. Right? It's like Solomon, like when you look at his reign, like his name literally means peace. Right? He is supposed to be the Prince of Peace. Right? He's the son of David, who is this heir to this new covenant that is going to reign over Israel forever. He builds this place for God to come and dwell. And it seems like the author wants you to view him as the Messiah. But he's not going to cut it. And that's why it's so tragic, right? And we begin to see this in chapter 9. Right? So chapter 9, it began, if you remember, with God giving a warning to Solomon. Right? And specifically, this warning flowed right after, it specifically says, after Solomon had finished all of his building projects. Right? So he'd finished his palace, he'd finished the temple, he'd finished all that stuff. God approaches Solomon and says, "Hey, Solomon, now you need to be careful. Because if you're not careful, you're going to fall into sin." And it's very similar to Genesis chapter 4 whenever God approaches Cain. Right? Sin is crouching at your door. You must rule over it, or it will be your downfall. That is what God warned Solomon of there. He says, "Solomon, you've been a man on a mission for these last few years. You've now accomplished that mission, and you're going to wonder what to do with the rest of your life. Are you going to be like your father, David, who used his downtime to go sleep with Bathsheba? Or are you going to use this time of rest to enjoy the rest I've given you and go and further my kingdom?" Well, that leads us to chapter 10, right? Because in chapter 9, we got to see that Solomon started making some questionable decisions, right? They weren't inherently bad, but they weren't inherently good either, right? And really the difficult thing that we had with last week's chapter was trying to figure out whether or not Solomon was in the right or in the wrong, right? Because you're reading it and you're like, I could see how he got there, but I could also see how that might not be good. And we're beginning to see that Solomon is doing things that don't seem very Solomon-like. Because this is the wisest man and the richest man in the world, yet he's doing this? And it's like, ooh, what's happening here? Well, here in chapter 10, it's going to really come to, it's going to come to a boiling point. But at the same time, from a purely secular perspective and from a worldly perspective, the kingdom is going to continue growing. And we're going to see that it's going to have more money than ever before. It's going to have a better established army than ever before. It is going to be in greater peace than ever before. But if you're somebody who has read the Torah, you know that God's kingdom is not like the kingdoms of the world. And therefore, all because things look good from a worldly perspective does not mean that they are all good in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. That's what we're going to see in this chapter. Sound good? Mm-hmm. All right. 1 Kings chapter 10. Sean, take us away. Sorry, I need to move that so I can see the clock so that I can know what time it is. All right. Verses 1 through 10.
Now the queen of Sheba heard the report about Solomon concerning the name of Yahweh. So she came to test him with riddles. She came to Jerusalem with a very glorious retinue, with camels carrying spices and very much gold and precious stones. And she came to Solomon and spoke to him about all that was in her heart. And Solomon declared to her the answer to all her matters. There was not a matter which was hidden from the king, which he did not declare to her. Then the queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food of his table, the seating of his servants, the disposition of his attendants and their attire, his cupbearers, and his stairway by which he went up to the house of Yahweh, so that there was no more spirit in her. Then she said to the king, "The word is true, which I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. Nevertheless, I did not believe those words until I came and my eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not declared to me. You exceed in wisdom and prosperity the report which I heard. How blessed are your men, how blessed are these your servants, who stand before you continually and hear your wisdom. Blessed be Yahweh your God, who delighted in you, to set you on the throne of Israel. Because Yahweh loved Israel forever, therefore he made you king, to do justice and righteousness." Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, and a very great amount of spices and precious stones. Never again did such abundance of spices come in as that which the queen of Sheba gave King Solomon.
Perfect. Thank you. So these first 10 verses, you're not going to see the cracks in the armor as much. right? This is actually going to be like what we see right here is actually a really good moment for Solomon, which is going to make the rest of the chapter all the more heartbreaking, right? This is really the final good story about Solomon, right? And it's one that is going to be referenced several times throughout the rest of the Bible, right? The Queen of Sheba, the Queen of the South, coming to visit Solomon. Isaiah is going to mention this story, and even Jesus himself is going to mention this, right? And he says that the Queen of the South is going to stand in judgment over the people who rejected Jesus, because the Queen of the South recognized the wisdom of Solomon, yet those people did not recognize the wisdom of Jesus, who is greater than Solomon, right? And so this story goes down in history as a very popular one. Is there anything that y'all noticed right off the bat that y'all want to highlight before we start breaking it down? Yeah.
I do. You can see that King Solomon is doing a really good job because he built a kingdom unlike the nations, and the nations are talking about it, wondering what's up, and that's a good thing that you want to do.
Yes. Yeah. He's
God's kingdom is supposed to be different from the nation.
Exactly. Right, and that's why I'm saying
doing something right, but you can tell things are getting like, oh, all this gold and spices. And,
yeah. Well, no, what it does, this is why it's going to make the rest of the chapter so heartbreaking, because what we see right here is a picture of what the kingdom was supposed to be, right? Israel exists. Remember, this is the beautiful thing about how God works, right? Whenever God is doing stuff with Israel, he's got his eyes on Israel, but he also always has his eyes on the Gentiles as well, right? Because everything he's doing with Israel is for the sake of the Gentiles. And even nowadays, with the stuff that God is doing with us, the Gentiles, he's doing it with his eyes on Israel, right? And so whenever God is ministering to Israel and he's doing things through them, he's doing it through them so that the Gentiles will come to him, right? And then right now, the whole reason why we are part of the church is so that he can make Israel jealous so that Israel will come to him, right? So this is just the wisdom of God. But what we see right here is exactly what Rocky's pointing out. That's what the kingdom existed to do, right? We have a Gentile person coming, and notice what she hears. Now the Queen of Sheba heard the report about Solomon concerning the name of Yahweh. It's not simply that she heard about how awesome Solomon was. It was about how awesome Solomon was because of what Yahweh had given him the ability to do. By the end of this passage that Sean just read, she's worshiping Yahweh, right? She is not simply a woman coming to praise Solomon. She is a woman who is converting because she realizes that this wisdom and this prosperity can only come from a good and righteous God. This is exactly what Israel existed for, right? And so this is a really good moment here. Anything else y'all want to highlight before we walk through it? That's a very good thing to notice there.
I noticed that the queen came to test Solomon with riddles.
Yes. She comes skeptical, right? She doesn't come here intending to praise Solomon. It's almost like she can't believe the hype, right? She shows up expecting him to not live up to what everybody's hyped him up to be. But when she gets there, she's amazed because he lives up to the hype. It's really remarkable. Let's walk through it. Now, the Queen of Sheba heard the report about Solomon concerning the name of Yahweh. I just want to highlight this because it's something that we can't see in English. This is a huge series of just a play on words in Hebrew, right? In Hebrew, this is what it says. I'm going to butcher this pronunciation. I'm all right at reading Hebrew. I'm not good at pronouncing Hebrew, right? I kind of just want to move to Israel for a few months so I can get better at that. So this is going to be really rough. But it says, Vumalka Shala Shamat et Shama Shalmo Lashem Yahweh. So it's like Shalah, 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 Shalah. Like almost every word is
Sheba
like...
heard Solomon's name.
Yeah, so Sheba and it's heard, and the word report is literally, the word report is literally, I'm pretty sure, the hearing. Right? It's literally, she heard the hearing of Solomon. So it's like so Shiva, Shema, the Shema of Shlomo, concerning the Shem, the name of Yahweh. Right? It's just like it's just, in Hebrew, it's just really funny. And then she tests him with riddles, and it sounds like the first verse almost was a riddle. Right? But, once again, the reason why Hebrew authors usually do this, and they'll have these play on words, is because they want it to stick in your mind. Right? Usually that's why we alliterate things, right? First off, it sounds cool, but it also has the effect of lingering in your head. So the author wants you to realize why Sheba is coming. the Queen of Sheba hears the report about Solomon concerning the Shem of Yahweh. So she has heard about Yahweh. Now, if you're a Jewish person, this is going to stick out to you, because what is the most important verse in the entire Torah according to a Jewish person?
Hear, O Israel?
Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu Yahweh Echad. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone. So it's a command to Israel for them to hear that Yahweh is God and Yahweh alone. But now it's not simply Israel that is hearing this. Now you have a Gentile who is hearing that Yahweh is Israel's God and Yahweh alone, and now she is coming to hear about it. Because Solomon has been loving the Lord his God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength. Like, he's been doing all the things. This is exactly what Israel existed to do. Right? So if you're a Jewish person, you're like, yes, amen, hallelujah, this is why we exist. Don't ask me where Sheba is. People do not know. Some people suggest that it's like down in like Ethiopia, right? So like kind of like south of Egypt. Other people will suggest it's in like the Arabian area. I don't know, right? It does not exist to this day, and so really we can just kind of guess. It seems like scholars lean more towards it being in like the Arabian area, but Ethiopians insist that it's there, right? And so I don't know. I don't know the answer there. But she comes from here. I would kind of lean towards it being down in Ethiopia just because Jesus calls her the Queen of the South. And it makes sense to call her the Queen of the South if you're in Israel and Ethiopia South. I don't know. So the Queen of Sheba hears the report about Solomon concerning the name of Yahweh. So she hears that something is going on regarding Solomon, but it's not just about Solomon himself, right? Because there's a lot of kings who have a lot of power. What she has heard is that this king has been given this special and unique wisdom from Yahweh, right? Like, this is a human king with divine power working through him. And she hears about that and she wants to check it out. So she came to test him with riddles. Once again, she does not come she hasn't bought into it yet, right? Instead, she travels this long journey just because she wants to test him. She has some difficult questions. Maybe they're like political, diplomatic questions, or maybe they're literally just riddles. And she's like, you know what? I've gathered all the finest thinkers in the land, and these are questions they don't know the answers to. Let me test you, right? Everybody says that you're the wisest person in the world. Let's put it to the test. And so that's why she makes this journey. And the question becomes, will Solomon pass the test? She came to Jerusalem with a very glorious retinue, with camels carrying spices and very much gold and precious stones. So what do we learn about this woman?
I'm guessing she's rich.
She's rich.
Very rich.
Right? Whatever Sheba was, it's a pretty nice place apparently. Because as she's going here, she's got all these riches with her. Now, why do you think she has all these riches with her?
To offer them to Solomon.
To offer them to Solomon if he passes the test. Right? It's not like she just was like, you know what, I feel like carrying a lot of gold with me. No, she says if he can pass these tests, I'm going to honor this king. In many ways, it's kind of almost reminiscent of the Magi coming to offer gifts to Jesus, right? Except Jesus doesn't have to pass any tests, right? But here you have royalty from faraway lands coming to give gifts to the king who is the son of David, right? And if she's coming from the south, she's probably having to pass through Bethlehem to get to Jerusalem, right? And ironically, the Magi, they went to Jerusalem first, right? And they're like, hey, where's the king going to be born? Right? So there's actually kind of this parallel there. So she comes to Jerusalem with a very glorious retinue, with camels carrying spices and very much gold and precious stones. And she came to Solomon and spoke to him about all that was in her heart. So what type of questions does she ask?
Matters that were on her heart, like what she felt like she wanted to ask him.
Yeah, the idea is that anything, right? Anything that was on her heart, right? It's kind of like, like she comes in and Solomon says, all right, you've traveled a long ways. I'm not going to limit you to asking only certain questions. Any question you have to ask, throw it at me. This implies that Solomon was not afraid, right? Solomon's like, I got this. So she shows up, and she doesn't simply limit her questions to specific matters of, like just politics or just this or just that. Whatever she has questions about, she throws out there. Anything that's on her heart, she throws it before Solomon to test him, right? And it calls them riddles, right? I don't know what the word is. Let me look up what the word riddles is in verse 1. So it looks like it's the word chida in Hebrew. And it just means difficult question, parables, riddles, stuff like that. It shows up in Judges. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. With Samson, whenever Samson gives the people a riddle, right? It's something like that, right? So she's giving him difficult questions, right? Things that are not easy, right? Stuff that she's personally been struggling with, or things that she is proposing specifically to test him. Very similar, once again, to like the Pharisees, right? The Pharisees, they test Jesus with difficult questions and riddles. And it's because they're wanting to see if Jesus lives up to the hype. The issue is they're not going to respond like Sheba does, right? Which is exactly why Jesus rebukes the people in his time period, right? Because people at Jesus' time period, they tested him, but whenever he passed the test, they did not worship him, right? Instead, they just hardened their hearts and kept pushing against him, right? Whereas with Sheba, she's responding as you should, right? She tests it because she wants to make sure, like she doesn't want to blindly believe what she hears, but she is going to, Also, I just want to highlight this. I'm drawing a lot of Jesus connections here because it's just so cool. So notice that what she's going to say later on is she says, I have heard this, but now I have seen it, right? Well, Jesus is going to reference that type of methodology as well, right? And he's going to say to Thomas, blessed are those who have believed without seeing, right? So it's not bad for Sheba to come here and test this to see whether or not Solomon actually had the wisdom. But it would have been even cooler if she hadn't. If she had simply heard and believed. Right? And that's kind of like, that's a cool thing for us, right? Because none of us have seen Jesus, but we have believed based off the testimony. But for Sheba, what she's doing here, she just doesn't want to blindly believe it, right? Because anybody can make up stories. She wants to make sure that there's credibility behind these. She shows up, she starts throwing some serious, difficult questions before Solomon. And what we read, verse 3, is that Solomon declared to her the answer to all her matters. There was not a matter which was hidden from the king, which he did not declare to her. So does Solomon pass the test?
Yes.
Yeah.
He did.
And once again, what is the author trying to highlight about Solomon?
His wisdom.
His wisdom, right? And so, all because we're about to see Solomon fail a whole lot, the author's wanting to highlight to us that he is still at the height of his wisdom, right? It's not like his wisdom went away after he dedicated the temple. That wisdom is still there. And in fact, we're seeing his wisdom at the height of it, right? This woman literally traveled thousands of miles to test his wisdom, and she probably had a lot of time to come up with some really difficult questions, right? She was probably not asking simple stuff like, how can a good God exist when there's so much evil in the world? Or, if God's so powerful, can he create a stone that he can't lift? She's probably not asking stuff like that. She's probably asking stuff that is actually difficult to answer. And he's answering them, right? I mean, how cool would it be to sit in on this conversation, right? I don't even know what they're talking about, right? But this is probably an amazing conversation, right? So she goes there, she challenges him, and he answers every single question. There's not, and notice it says it twice, right? He declared the answer to her in all matters, so it says it in the positive way, and then in the negative manner, there was not a matter which was hidden from the king which he did not declare to her, right? So it states it twice for emphasis. Right? He answered all of them. There wasn't one he didn't answer. Then the queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food of his table, the seating of his servants, the disposition of his attendants and their attire, his cupbearers and his stairway by which he went up to the house of Yahweh, so that there was no more spirit in her. So what is it that actually takes the queen of Sheba's breath away? That's what it means when it says there was no spirit in her. It doesn't mean she died or that her soul departed her body. It's a metaphor, right? It was like her breath was taken away. What is it that finally takes your breath away?
The way he treats his people.
Yeah, it's not just the wisdom, right? Like the wisdom impressed her, but the stuff that impresses her more is seeing his wisdom at work in the society that he's built, right? So like anybody can answer philosophical questions. It can sound really smart. But this isn't just a dude with head knowledge. This is a guy who has put the wisdom to work and has produced this amazing kingdom that is flourishing. And so he answers her questions, but then apparently, I don't know, I guess they were going for a walk during all this. And as he's answering these questions, she's seeing the kingdom he's built. And her breath's taken away. She realizes this dude does not only meet the hype, he surpasses the hype. The Queen of Sheba saw the wisdom of Solomon. So once again, she heard and she saw. She heard, she saw. Like I just like to highlight that. Hearing and seeing are really big themes throughout the Bible that I just like to point out. She saw all the wisdom of Solomon. That's interesting, like just a phrase there, right? We think of wisdom as a very like intangible thing, right? Wisdom is a thing that you possess in here. Well, she sees the wisdom of Solomon, right? Which means that wisdom can be seen, right? And it's seen through the things that you do, right? You can't say that you're a wise person if you're going and living foolishly, right? But she sees his wisdom because all the things that he has done affirm the fact that the things that he's saying in here are true, right? So she sees his wisdom.
It's like the fruits.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like it's the fruits of,
Yeah.
like, yeah. She sees the temple. She sees the palaces, right? It says she saw the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built. When it says the house that he had built, what's it referring to?
The temple.
The temple, right? She sees the temple. Wow. That is a fine house. The food of his table. So apparently they had a dinner together, right? And they had this luxurious thing. And remember when it talked about how much food Solomon ate each day? She's looking and she's like, this is one meal? Oh my gosh. This is an amazing kingdom. The seating of his servants. She got to see where his servants were seated and how they were treated. And the servants are treated well. The disposition of the attendants and their attire. So the way that the attendants went around conducting themselves, and the fact that apparently they seemed happy in their job, right? And they were content to serve. And even if they weren't happy, they acted like they were happy, right? They weren't going around just grumbling and serve. No, they were happy to be there. They were dressed nice. They weren't in servants' clothes, right? This literally, it just looked like a utopia to her. And she's like, wow, this is amazing. His cupbearers and his stairway by which he went up to the house of Yahweh. The word stairway there is probably unfortunate. The word literally means ascent, right? It could mean stairway to where she's just marveling at like a staircase that goes up to the house, which that makes sense because if you remember, Solomon's palace is down here and the temple is a little higher, so it could be that it's referring to a literal stairway. But more likely what this is referring to is an offering, right? The word literally means ascent, and there is a thing as an ascent offering, right? So it might not be that she's marveling at the stairway that goes up to Yahweh, the house of Yahweh, but it could be referring to an offering, like whenever Solomon goes and offers an offering at the house of Yahweh that ascends into heaven, right? It could be referring to that. It could be either way. I think that it's probably hinting at the ascent offering, mainly because if you notice, it starts by talking about the temple, the house of Yahweh, and then it starts talking about dinner imagery, right? And all of it is talking about attendants and servants and stuff like that. And then it ends with a stairway? Well, that seems kind of out of place, but think about it like this, right? Whenever you give an offering to God, what are you metaphorically doing?
You're worshiping him.
Well, you're worshiping him, but what are you metaphorically giving him? Food, right? You're giving him food, right? That's why it talks about it's a pleasing aroma to God, right? You are giving God food, right? Okay, well, so you have her marveling at the house of Yahweh, and then you have this long thing about the dinner table and the cupbearers and all these attendants and stuff like that, and then you have an offering being given to God. So it's bookended with this imagery of house of the Lord, right? The ascent offering to God, the dinner table, right? So if you work your way back inwards, it's like house of the Lord over here, dinner table, the ascent offering, house of the Lord, right? So it's like there's this parallel, and if you look in the middle, and it's talking about the attendants and the servants and stuff like that. If you look at the Hebrew words there, those are language that could also be employed to talking about like servants and priests working in a temple, right? And so I would say that it's probably referring more to just an offering, right? So she gets to see Solomon in both his political side and his religious side, right? She gets to see the temple that he built. She gets to see the servants going about doing their things, and that he's established a really good kingdom. And she probably gets to see what it looks like to worship Yahweh at the house of Yahweh. And she sees all of this, and it takes her breath away. There was no more spirit in her. It's like she's exhausted by just seeing how amazing this kingdom is. Then she said to the king, "The word is true which I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom." It's true, right? What I heard, 100% factual. Nevertheless, I did not believe those words until I came and my eyes had seen it. Once again, do you see the similarity between her and Thomas a little bit? Once again, I feel so bad for Thomas in the New Testament. He gets such a bad rap. None of the apostles believed without seeing. Just so you're aware of this, right? The only issue with Thomas is that he wasn't in the room whenever Jesus showed up to the others, right? And so none of them believed without seeing, and then Thomas just wasn't there, and he didn't believe their report. And that's why Jesus rebukes him, right? But there is this parallel, right? She heard, but she had not seen. But with her, I think it's probably a little bit more justifiable because, I mean, for all we don't know who she heard it from, right? Maybe they weren't trustworthy. She'd heard a lot of good stuff about Solomon, and so I actually think it's to her credit that she came and wanted to check it out, right? This is a good thing, right? I think that we are called to, test the spirits, right? And so she comes and she wants to check it out, and she says, "You know what? I didn't believe it, and I came in here skeptical, and I was not wanting to admit how smart you were and how wise you were, but this is too good to be true. I did not believe the words until I came with my eyes and seen it, and behold, the half was not declared to me. You exceed in wisdom and prosperity the report which I heard." So what does she say?
He exceeds her expectations of what she thought the temple was.
Yeah, not even just the temple, but just Solomon and all of his kingdom. Yeah.
I was thinking too.
Yeah. She says, were you saying something?
No, it's just like the report was wasn't even as half as much as what I'm seeing here, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's high praise, right? She says, what I'd heard seemed too good to be true, right? I came here thinking that people were way overhyping you. It turns out I hadn't even heard half of it, right? That's kind of like when you go see a movie, and I've had this experience a lot. I don't know about y'all. I know I go see movies probably more than a lot of people in here. Probably everybody, maybe other than Maverick. Maverick might go see more movies than me. I don't know. I love going to see movies, right? The issue is, sometimes people overhype movies a little bit. And people be like, "This is the best movie ever." And it's a good movie. But the issue is, it has been so hyped up that you go into it expecting it to be perfect. And whenever it's not that, you kind of leave disappointed. And you leave with a bad taste in your mouth. Whereas if it hadn't been hyped up ahead of time, you probably would have gone in and enjoyed it more. Right? And it seems like that's what the Queen of Sheba was coming in with this mentality, right? It was almost like she had set herself up for disappointment because the things that she had heard about Solomon seemed too good to be true. She's like, there's no way that this guy is nearly as awesome as they say, right? This dude sounds almost like a god on earth by how people are talking about it. So she came in here expecting to be disappointed because she thought there was no way that the movie would live up to the hype. But then she sees it. And she looks, she's like, they left out half the good stuff. Oh my gosh, this dude's amazing. Right? This kingdom is amazing. It's fantastic. But notice that she's not just going to praise Solomon. Verse 8. How blessed are your men. How blessed are these servants, these your servants who stand before you continually and hear your wisdom. So she starts off praising Solomon. Eventually she's going to talk about Yahweh. But what does she start by praising there?
Repeat the question, I'm sorry.
So what is she saying in verse 8? What is she communicating?
Does the people around him, or let's just have him?
Yeah, and not just the people around him, but who specifically?
The people who serve him.
People who serve him, right? That's such it's such an amazing compliment, right? It's not like how awesome it would be to be your friend. No, how awesome it would be to just serve you, right? How amazing would it be to just be employed by you? That's got to be the most amazing privilege, right? I don't know what it was like. I don't know what she saw within these attendants, but something about it. She's like, that's amazing. Do you see how this is a portrait of Jesus, right? Because the picture is that Solomon is literally at the top of the world, right? There's nobody above him, and there's nobody equal to him, so everybody else is below him, right? They're all servants. They're all people in his employ. And she says, what an amazing privilege to serve a man like you, who is filled with such wisdom. Well, that should be our mentality, right? This is why whenever Paul introduces a lot of his letters, he calls himself a slave of Christ Jesus. And this is why James, the brother of Jesus, does the same thing. It's because it's a privilege to be a slave, right? We don't like talking about slavery, and we like viewing ourselves as independent. But whenever your king is somebody like Solomon or Jesus, it's blessed to even be counted as a servant. How amazing it would be to just serve a king like you. Wow. What an amazing king. How blessed are your men? How blessed are these servants who stand before you continually and hear your wisdom? She says, you know what? I would trade all the riches of the world to just be just to be a servant who gets to sit in your courts every day. She said, I had to travel thousands of miles, and I'm going to give you all this money just to hear you for a day. Your servants, they're employed by you, and they get to stand there and they get to attend to you while you distribute this wisdom regularly. I mean, the idea is that with a king like this in charge, even the lowliest of servants is going to be wiser than all the other kings in the world, just because the servants are constantly in the presence of this wise king, right? She's like, how awesome it would be to just be a servant. You don't have to be a royal magistrate in the kingdom of Israel, because guess what? Honestly, it'd be better to be a slave, right? Once again, it's the paradox of the kingdom, right? The lowest amongst you will be the one who's exalted the most, because if you're an elder in the kingdom of Israel, you're probably having to go out and you're having to go about doing all this other business, which keeps you away from Solomon because you're doing stuff for Solomon. But to be a servant of Solomon, well, you're always by his side. You're the one, you've got the palm leaves and you're fanning him and you're feeding him grapes and stuff like that. You're always in his presence. And as a result, you are getting to hear all the wisdom that he dispenses to each person. And she says, how amazing would it be to be that servant? Right? It's actually better to be lower. Because the lowlier you are, the closer you get to be to him, because he's not going to be sitting you have to do the other stuff. You're just going to be the one who's constantly in his presence. How blessed would it be to be your men, to be your servants, right? To stand before you continually and hear your wisdom. She says, I'm going to come in here, we're going to meet up, and I'm going to go back to my land, I'm going to rule over there. Your servants get to stand before you continually. Once again, to go back to, well, not once again, I haven't brought this up before, but I brought it up almost every week because it's my favorite Bible verse. King David, one thing have I asked of the Lord, and that shall I seek, to meditate. Why am I laying on the verse? One thing have I asked of the Lord, and that shall I seek, to. Why am I blanking on my favorite verse? What is it?
I'll turn to read it.
It's to meditate on the house, meditate in the house of the Lord, to gaze upon the beauty of his temple. I'm skipping a line.
Meditate in his temple?
What is it? One thing have I asked, and that shall I seek, to. What's wrong with me? This is bad. This is my favorite verse in the entire Bible.
It happens.
Psalm 27:4. For shame.
27.
One thing have I asked of the Lord, and that shall I seek, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. There you go. To gaze on the beauty of the Lord, to seek him in his temple. I was like, to dwell in the house of the Lord. Right? The whole point that David is saying there is that he just wants to be an attendant in the house of Yahweh. He just wants to dwell there. He just wants to be in his presence. The Queen of Sheba, she comes here and she says, Solomon, after spending this whole day with you, I just want to be one of your servants. Because that's the person who's blessed. Because they get to be with you all the time. But then she doesn't stop with just praising Solomon. Blessed be Yahweh your God, who delighted in you, to set you on the throne of Israel. Because Yahweh loved Israel forever, therefore he made you king to do justice and righteousness. To do justiceness. I just created a new word. So what does she say there?
That's funny. Verse 9.
Yeah, what is she saying?
Blessed be Yahweh.
She's blessing Yahweh for the work that he's doing through Solomon.
Yeah. Once again, this highlights what Rocky said earlier.
You're having a Gentile think Yahweh. That's a thumbs up.
Yes. Well, yeah. You have a foreign, probably pagan Gentile
Queen.
blessing, a royal, foreign, pagan, Gentile, praising the God of Israel because he is the one who put Solomon on the throne. This is why Israel existed. Right? It is because, they're supposed to be set apart so that in them all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Right? Genesis chapter 15. Genesis chapter 12. Let's go to Genesis 12. God said to Abram, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you. The one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. So he says, Abraham, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you great, and you are called to bless others. That's what Solomon's doing, right? He has been blessed by God. His name has been made great, and he is blessing others with his wisdom. And as a result, all the families of the earth are being blessed, right? The Queen of Sheba looks at this and says, blessed be Yahweh for putting a king like you on the throne. Because if a king like you is the one chosen by Yahweh, then Yahweh must be an amazing God. This is it's a full-out conversion, right? She says, if this is what it looks like to serve Yahweh, then sign me up. Because if somebody like you is the type of guy that he would employ, and if you got his wisdom, your wisdom from him, and if you, the king of this mighty nation, feel like it's important to build a house for him, and she's seen the house, right? She's like, this is not just a temple like you see in all the other cities. This is a palace. And your palace that you've made for God is better than the palace you made for yourself. And so if you, the greatest man and the wisest man I've ever seen, esteems this God this highly, then that is a blessed God indeed. Blessed be Yahweh your God who delighted in you to set you on the throne of Israel because you loved Yahweh, because Yahweh loved Israel forever. Notice what she picks up from this, right? I'm assuming that she picked up on this from her talk with Solomon, but she says, because Yahweh loved Israel forever. There's some really cool theology for you, right? Because Yahweh loved Israel forever. When does God's love for Israel stop? Never. Which is something that I think the church has needed to learn throughout history, because there's been many times in the church's history whenever we have forgotten that God loves Israel, and we have been pretty anti-Semitic ourselves, and there's still a lot of Christians nowadays who are sadly anti-Semitic. No, what it says, Yahweh loves Israel forever. He's got an eternal covenant with them. And she says, this is why you've been put here, is because Yahweh loves Israel forever. Therefore, he made you king to do justice and righteousness. I almost said it again, justiceness. To do justice and righteousness. Genesis chapter 18. This is where God actually specifies for the very first time why he picked Abraham in this whole thing. Right? This is in the context right before God is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? If you remember the story, Abraham was sitting in his tent and then 3 men walk up to him. Right? And one of them is God and the 2 of them are angels. Right? And Abraham ends up meeting with them. The men promise them that the next year, God promises Abraham that the next year at this time, he's going to come back and Abraham's going to have Isaac, right? His son. Well, Abraham gets up and he starts walking these 3 guys away, and they start heading in the direction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And God knows he's about to destroy the land. And this is what God says. Genesis 18, verse 17. Then Yahweh said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Hey, that's the same language I just read about. Abraham's going to become a great nation, and in him all families of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him, so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of Yahweh by doing righteousness and justice, so that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. So that's the first time that God ever specifies exactly why he chose Abraham. He says, I have chosen Abraham to do one thing, and that is to keep the way of Yahweh. The word for keep there is the word, it means to guard or to protect. It's the same Hebrew word for whenever God appoints the cherubim to guard the way into the Garden of Eden. Right? they're supposed to be guardians of the way of Yahweh, right? The reason why God chose Abraham and Abraham's seed was because they're supposed to be the ones who show everybody what it looks like to follow the way to Yahweh, right? Whenever Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, that's what he's saying, right? Abraham was chosen to be a guardian of the way. And the way that he guards the way is by doing two things: justice and righteousness. That's what it said in Genesis 18. So how is it? Well, he has to preserve God's justice. He has to preserve God's righteousness. What does Sheba compliment Solomon on right here?
Justice and righteousness.
Justice and righteousness. He's doing what Israel was supposed to do. This is great. He is guarding the way of Yahweh. And as a result, who is Sheba being pointed to?
Yahweh.
Yahweh. Right? She looks at Solomon, and because he is the guardian of the way, and he just showed her the way, she says, blessed be Yahweh. It's funny because it's way, Yahweh. Okay. So she says all this stuff, and then it says, then she gave the king 120 talents of gold and a very great amount of spices and precious stones. So it's all the things that it said that she brought with her at the beginning. Right? So now you see why she brought it. Never again did such abundance of spices come in as that which the queen of Sheba gave King Solomon. Which is saying a lot, because Solomon, we've already seen that he receives a whole lot of stuff. All right, shall we continue? Verses 11 through 13.
Also, the ships of Hiram, which carried gold from Ophir, brought in from Ophir a very great number of almug trees and precious stones. And the king made of the almug trees supports for the house of Yahweh and for the king's house, also lyres and harps for the singers. Such almug trees have not come in again, nor have they been seen to this day. Thus King Solomon gave to the queen of Sheba all her desire which she asked, besides what he gave her according to his royal bounty. Then she turned and went to her own land, she and her servants.
Perfect. I hate to break it to you, these are going to be the final really positive verses in this chapter. It's going to go downhill pretty quickly. So what do we read here? We can cover these verses pretty quickly.
Somebody else brought him more gold, trees, and precious stones.
Yes.
Almond trees.
Yeah. Yeah, so the ships of Hiram, first off, so Hiram is who?
It's close to Tyre, I know that.
Well, it's very close to Tyre. He's the king of Tyre. Yes.
The two cities are close.
Well, Hiram is not a city, it's a person.
Yeah.
Right, Hiram is the king of Tyre. Right, yeah. So, also the ships of Hiram, which carried gold from Ophir, brought in from Ophir a very great number of almug trees and precious stones. Ophir is the place we talked about last week, right?
Yeah, we don't know where it's at.
Yeah, we don't know where it's at. I'm assuming it's probably somewhere near Tyre and Sidon. Like that makes
Yeah, it's
sense.
probably not very far away.
Yeah, it's probably in like the Lebanon area. And it honestly could be associated with, like, you know, if you go a little bit north of Lebanon, that'd be getting closer to Mesopotamia. So
Yeah.
whenever you get to the Garden of Eden story and talks about Havilah and whatever, I don't know, could be
Yeah.
related. Also the ships of Hiram, which carried gold from Ophir, brought in from Ophir a very great number of almug trees and precious stones. Almug trees, I don't know much about them, other than the fact I know that they're scented. Like, there's like a very strong like smell to them. So very nice wood, right? This is like high quality stuff. Hiram is he's kind of just a tree guy, I guess. I don't know. Like, every time we talk about Hiram, we just talk about trees. There's the cedars of Lebanon and then the almug trees of Ophir. And they also bring precious stones. Once again, every time you hear this precious stone and trees and stuff like that, what's it supposed to be bringing your mind back to?
Eden.
Garden of Eden, right? The idea is that it began with the temple, right? Where Solomon was creating a garden for God, right? The palace. But now notice that the garden is expanding, right? It's no longer just the temple itself that is Eden. It's expanding into Solomon's whole kingdom, right? Which is kind of what the whole goal was, right? Remember, whenever God told them to cultivate the garden, they were supposed to fill the earth, right? The Garden of Eden was a small place, but they were called to work it and fill the earth, right? The whole point was to fill the earth and turn the earth into Eden, right? That's kind of what Solomon's doing here, right? And so the stuff from Ophir is coming in, And the king made the almond tree supports for the house of Yahweh, right, and for the king's house, right? So once again, you see that parallel. What is done to the temple is done to the king's palace, because you've got this parallel between the God who is enthroned on Mount Zion and Solomon, who is enthroned right below him. But he also used this wood for lyres and harps for the singers. Who would these singers be?
Cherubim?
No, not cherubim. Who would the singers be?
I'm guessing the choir.
Probably like worship leaders, right? And so he uses I just love what he's using the wood for, right?
Worship.
Yeah, he's using it for worship, right? He makes apparently these very nice, like instruments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like harps, lyres, stuff like that. Such almond trees have not come in again, nor have they been seen to this day. Little phrases like that remind you once again that this book was written quite some time after that. Which is also really sad, because you get the idea that the person writing this book is looking back on the glory days, right? That's why it's emphasizing this stuff. We read this stuff and we get bored and we're like, almond trees, who cares? Well, this is written during a time period where somebody is, they don't have it, right? It's kind of like whenever we reflect on American history and we're like, man, remember back when we were amazing? Not anymore. That's what's happening here, right? It's like, yeah, they had almond trees, guys. Like nowadays, we're having to make like these like cruddy little instruments. Solomon was making them out of these rare trees, right? That's how good things were back then. You want to say something, Rocky?
Almond trees, you and I first think of the Lorax.
Oh gosh,
Oh yeah, I remember that movie.
all the trees have been cut down. The Lorax would not be happy. Thus King Solomon gave to the queen of Sheba all her desire which she asked, besides what he gave her according to his royal bounty. So what do we see there?
She gave her royal bounty to him.
Well, you see this mutual giving, right? She gave him stuff, but he also gave her things as well. And apparently she asked for it, which is also interesting, right? In addition to the wisdom, she apparently just was like, hey, I like that. Can I bring that back with me to Sheba? And he's like, yeah, take it. In fact, take this too. And so she's clearly the one in the inferior position here, right? She recognizes this, but he's still giving to her, right? He's not using this as an opportunity to flex his pride and stuff. Instead, he is serving the Gentiles, right? He is blessing people, right? This is what Israel was called to do. God is blessing Solomon. Solomon's blessing others. The Gentiles are blessing them. This is a picture of what Eden is supposed to look like. This is a picture of the Abrahamic covenant, right? I don't know if I've ever showed this to y'all. I usually like to do a little diagram where in the whole Abrahamic covenant thing, Genesis 12, there's really three parties involved, right? There's Abraham, there's God, and there's other people, right? And God promises that no matter what, he's going to bless Abraham. And he tells Abraham that no matter what, his job is to bless others. Really, the question becomes, how are others going to respond to Abraham? Because how others respond to Abraham is going to dictate how God responds to them, right? And so, if the others respond to Abraham by even slighting him, right? It says, the version I just read said, I will curse those who curse you. In Hebrew, they're different words. It's really saying, I will curse those who slight you, right? So if somebody even slightly is insulting towards Abraham, God says, I'm going to be harsh against you. That you're going down, right? You do not treat my boy badly, right? And so, Yahweh blesses Abraham. Abraham blesses others. If those other people even slight Abraham, God will curse them. However, if those people bless Abraham back, then Yahweh will bless them. And in that situation, everybody's blessing one another. Yahweh's blessing Abraham. Abraham's blessing others. Others are blessing Abraham. Yahweh's blessing them. Right? That is the portrait that is painted in Genesis chapter 12. And that's what we see happening here. Right? Yahweh blessed Solomon. Solomon blessed Sheba. Sheba blessed Solomon. Yahweh blesses Sheba. Right? And Sheba blesses Yahweh. Right? And so you see that this is literally a portrait of what Eden is supposed to be like. Which is really good. Mm-hmm. It's not going to last long. So Solomon gave to the queen of Sheba all her desire which she asked, besides what he gave to her according to the royal bounty. So he apparently also gave her money. Then she turned and went to her own land, she and her servants. she departs and goes back, and it's probably good that she did because things are going to go downhill. Fun little trivia fact about the Queen of Sheba real quick before we get to the other stuff. I talked earlier about how Ethiopians have this tradition about, Sheba being from Ethiopia. That phrase, according to all that she desired. According to Ethiopian tradition, the thing that she desired from Solomon was an heir. And so they actually have a tradition that Solomon basically slept with the Queen of Sheba and provided her with an heir, and she went back home to Sheba, and her heir was a Solomonic, descended from Solomon. And I think that they argue that for generations, I think literally up until the 1970s, they argued that their king was descended from King Solomon, which is pretty wild. And so I haven't really looked into that a whole lot, but I know that is an Ethiopian tradition worth looking into. Not really. I don't want to focus on it too much because it's not relevant to understanding this passage. I just thought it was kind of cool whenever I learned about it. So let's move on. Verses 14 through 22.
Okay. Now the weight of gold which came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Besides that from which the traders and the wares of the merchants and all the kings of the Arabs and the governors of the country. And King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold, using 600 shekels of gold on each large shield. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold, using 3 minas of gold on each shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with refined gold. There were 6 steps to the throne, and a round top to the throne at its rear, and arms on each side of the seat, and 2 lions standing beside the arms. 12 lions were also standing there on the 6 steps, on the one side and on the other. Nothing like it was made for all the other kingdoms. Now all King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None was of silver. It was not considered valuable in the days of Solomon. For the king had at sea the ships of Tarshish with the ships of Hiram. Once every 3 years the ships of Tarshish came carrying gold and silver, ivory, and apes and peacocks.
All right. Everything's going great, right? Or so it seems. Things are not as good as it looks right here, right? I know that from an earthly perspective, this sounds amazing, right? I mean, every single detail in this, fantastic. We'll talk about why it's a problem in a second. But first, let's just walk through it. Now, the weight of gold, which came to Solomon in 1 year, was 666 talents of gold. Does anybody know how much of a talent is? I've looked this up before. How much is a talent? Let's just ask Google. A talent, a Babylonian talent is equivalent to 66 pounds. So, if you take 666 times 66, that would be 43,956 pounds of gold. 44,000 pounds of gold in 1 year.
It's basically 666 bars.
Yes.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, this right here, once again, I've talked about this. This is gold, and this is very valuable. This is a tiny little chain. What we see here is that Solomon's not only the wisest man in the world, he's the richest man in the world. Right? This dude is putting Elon Musk to shame by far. This is unparalleled. Right? This dude, as we're going to see, he is so wealthy, and he has so much gold, that silver isn't even valuable in that time period because of just how much luxury he has. Nobody wants silver anymore, right? Because he's just got so much gold. It's if you got so much gold, why would you care about silver, right? That's what this kingdom is like. And so from an earthly perspective, it's fantastic. In 1 year, 666 talents of gold. There's what you could read into the 666 thing. I think it's just a number, right? But some people, it's inevitable. You look at 666. What's the immediate thing that you think of?
Antichrist.
The mark of the beast, right? Just to be clear, the book of Revelation isn't going to be written for another over 1,000 years, right? So I don't think that's what's happening in mind. But the thing is, the Holy Spirit can do what the Holy Spirit wants. And so some people have argued that maybe the 666 could have some sort of significance to it, especially given what the rest of this chapter details. We know that 7 is the number of perfection. 6 is the number of like constantly falling short of perfection, right? 666, right? It's just falling short. You could read into that, right? I wouldn't stretch it out like that. But to be fair, by the end of this chapter, or by the end of what we're going to cover today, Solomon is going to be worshiping other gods. And so, who knows? You've got this huge wealth coming in, but it's 666. It's the mark of the beast. I don't know. I think it's a bit of a stretch, but people highlighted it, and it's there, and people were probably thinking it as soon as you read it, so I just wanted to address that. In 1 year, that's how much he made. Which means that the next year, he probably made around the same. And the next year, around the same. No wonder Sheba was so impressed by this. And that's just what he got from one venture, right? Besides that, from the traders and the wares and the merchants and all the kings and the Arabs and the governors of the country. So there was also gold coming in from other stuff as well, right? This is just from one thing he received 666 talents of gold. And King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold, using 600 shekels of gold on each large shield. Now, what are shields used for?
Protection in battle.
Not golden shields. Because what do we know about gold as a metal? Is it good for defense? No, why?
It's more like brittle.
Soft.
It's brittle and soft. These are not shields that you bring out into battle. So if he is having these 200 shields made, what's he using them for?
Decoration.
Decoration. Verse 17. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold, using 3 minas of gold on each shield, and the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Remember that one building that he built that we didn't really know what it was for? It was probably like a meeting room or something like that? Or a dining room? Seems like he just turned it into an armory, right? But not armor that you take out into battle. This is where you show everybody how wealthy you are by saying, hey, look at this armor that we have made of gold. You just walk in this room, and remember the forest of Lebanon, like, it's not saying that this house was in Lebanon. It's saying that the cedars of Lebanon were shipped here. This whole building was made from those cedar trees. So you walked in there and it felt like you were in Lebanon. Right? It's the house, the forest of Lebanon. It is a house made of those cedars. And now if you walked in on the walls, you have what, 500 shields hanging there? You got the 200 large shields and the 300 smaller shields. All made of gold. That's really cool. Kind of. Once again, from an earthly perspective, this is the height of prosperity, right? There's never been a kingdom that looks like this. That's what Sheba was marveling at. But there's also a downside to this. Because, once again, what was the issue? Like, I mentioned this at the beginning of chapter 9 last week. Why was it that God came and warned Solomon at the beginning of the chapter? Why was it that God needed to hear, or why was it that Solomon needed to hear a warning?
Because God knew that gold could take his heart away from God.
No, not at the beginning of this chapter, beginning of chapter 9, last week.
Yeah.
Well, they kind of didn't have a clear goal anymore, so it's a matter of, like, what are you going to do with the rest of your time?
Yeah, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Right? Because before you had a mission. You wanted to build a temple. Well, now that you've done that, what are you going to do with the rest of your reign? Well, what is Solomon doing?
Making like physical things.
He's making stuff that isn't necessary.
Just kind of like, why?
Right? Yeah. Like, this is literally just a man at the top of the world who doesn't know what to do,
Yeah.
and so he's just doing stuff.
He has like an excessive amount of materials, and so he's like, just do something with them.
Yeah. And once again, this makes perfect sense if you've read Ecclesiastes. Right? Because all of the things that Solomon does here, if you read Ecclesiastes, you're like, yep, I get it. Because what he tells you in Ecclesiastes, he says, I searched. I was looking everywhere. I was trying to find contentment. Right? Because he didn't know what to do. Right? He says, I took on building projects. I made all these things. I had all this money. I had all these women. I had everything. I denied myself no pleasure known to man. Yet all of it was vanity. This is what he does, right? He is a guy at the top of the world. He is a king in charge of the greatest kingdom on the earth. And he's got 666 talents of gold. He has so much gold that he doesn't know what to do with it. So he says, you know what? Just turn it into shields and hang it on the wall. there's going to be an issue here, and we'll talk about what that issue is. But at the very least, we can say that this is just a dude with no goal in life, right? He has no mission. He is simply existing and reaping the benefits of his success. Were you going to say something, Rocky?
You know how it says not to multiply like chariots? Well, you should be multiplying gold shields.
Yes. Yeah, you're hinting at exactly what we're going to get at in a second. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with refined gold. As if to prove my point even further. First off, why do you need a throne made of ivory? Ivory is really expensive, but he doesn't even show off the ivory. He makes it of ivory just to overlay it with gold. Well, heck, Solomon, you could have just made it with wood. Right? Like, he's literally just doing it because he can. Right? That's the crazy thing here, right? This is a dude, like, is ivory going to make the throne any better? No. All you have to do is sit on it, right? And you covered it with gold anyways. This could have been made of anything, but this is a guy who is at the top, and he has so much money, he doesn't know what to do with it, and so what he does, he starts making stuff for himself, right? He's making shields to hang on his walls. He's making a fancy seat for himself to sit on. And you know who's going to be suffering as a result of him doing all this stuff? The people. Yeah. Sure enough, the people are going to complain and say, your father taxed us way too much. And he did this, and he was harsh with his servants. The way that his people are going to reflect on Solomon's reign is very different than what Queen of Sheba saw. Because after Queen of Sheba left, apparently, and to be fair, we don't know we don't know if that story was chronologically at this point. It could be that she came and visited him while the temple was being built and stuff, right? We don't know for sure. But this is a man who literally, everything switched. He was, for the longest time, he was serving other people. Now he's serving himself. Let's just make these shields and hang them on the wall. Let's, make a throne of ivory. Solomon, we have more gold. I don't know what to do with the gold. I don't know, make me a fancy chair, I guess. Make it of ivory and gold, and let's, make some lions and put them on the sides, and let's just make it fancy, right? Whenever people come in here, let them be intimidated by who I am, right? Like that. It's a guy who doesn't know what to do. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with refined gold. There were 6 steps to the throne, and a round top to the throne at its rear, and arms on each side of the seat, the 2 lions standing beside the arms. All right. There's some really cool imagery here. Some of these I don't want to read too much into it because I think it's literally just details to show how lavish it was, and it's supposed to be an indictment against Solomon. But let's break it down. There were 6 steps to the throne and a round top on the throne at its rear. Right? Kind of like you see in this picture over here, right? There's a rounded top. Some people view this as being parallel, once again, to the structure of the temple. Right? So you have 6. If there's 6 steps, well, then the throne itself would be the 7th step. Right? So, 7 days of creation, stuff like that. Very similar to the creation motifs that we saw with the temple. And then the circle above the throne would be kind of like the firmament, right? If you remember, God is seated above so God's throne is above the firmament. Well, Solomon's is really close, right? It's almost like Solomon's throne is like a miniature mountain, right? And biblical theology, mountains are where you meet with God, right? So, that's just always the image. Like, you go up, you're getting closer to God. Well, Solomon, you have to go up, right? And he is seated right below the firmament, which sounds dangerously close to the Tower of Babel to me, right? If you do read it like that, it's like, ooh, I don't know. But at the same time, it might not totally be Tower of Babel. It could be that this is what the king was supposed to do, right? Mediator between God and man, right? He is supposed to be close to God. So it's not inherently bad, but it's questionable. And so there's also lions here on the arms of the throne. There's lions carved right there. And then 12 lions were also standing there on the 6 steps on the one side and on the other, right? People also highlighted that there's 6 steps, 6 lions, 6 lions. It's another 666. I don't know. Just worth noticing. So there's 12 lions altogether. Why do you think there's 12 lions?
Tribes.
12 tribes of Israel. Why lions, do you think? What is the house of Judah most closely associated with?
Lion of the tribe of Judah.
Judah,
Yeah.
right? I think that this would basically him be saying that he, the son of the tribes of Judah, is reigning over the 12 tribes, right? And so there's 12 tribes, but there's a lion representing each of them, right? Because he is of the tribe of Judah, the lion from the tribe of Judah. I think that that's probably what it'd be going for. I don't know what the two lions on the arms would represent. But once again, people, we could be reading into a lot of this, right? I mean, even to this day, if you like I've gone for runs through neighborhoods and people have like random like lion statues out in the front yard. I don't think there's anything symbolic about it. I think they're like, that just looks cool. Maybe that's what Solomon's doing. I don't know. But people have tried reading into it, and I think that's fair, right? I think that the 12 is definitely intentional. 12 lions were also standing there on the 6 steps, on the one side and on the other. Nothing like it was made for all the other kingdoms. Now all King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. This is wild, right? He's got gold. Like, imagine like opening up a cupboard and everything in it's of gold. And you're like, oh, are these collectibles? And you're like, nah, just pour me a glass of milk. It's like, what? You use this to drink out of? Like, the idea is that this is just pure excess, right? He's got more than he can handle. Right? He's got way too much. He's got drinking vessels of gold. All the vessels in the house of the forest of Lebanon. We still don't even know what this house is even for, really. Right? I don't even, is it a meeting house? Is it a place where they would have, debates? I don't know. Right? But not only were the shields on the walls gold, but everything in the house was gold. Which is really cool from an earthly perspective, but not if you're a king of the people of Israel.
It's almost like King Midas or something, like everything he touches is gold.
Kind of, right? It almost feels that way, and that story didn't end well for King Midas. None was silver. It was not considered valuable in the days of Solomon, which implies that in the days that this guy's writing it, silver was considered valuable, which probably implies that the people of Israel are not doing nearly as hot as they were back in Solomon's day, right? But Solomon is so wealthy that nobody even used silver. There was no use for silver because gold was the thing. There was so much gold, it was like, why would you need silver? Like, no, silver is cheap, right? We don't need silver. Gold is the way to go, because that's what Solomon drinks from. For the king had at sea the ships of Tarshish and the ships of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the ships of Tarshish came carrying gold and silver, ivory and apes and peacocks. Ivory and apes and peacocks? Once again, do you see what I'm talking about when I'm saying this is a guy who does not have a mission? Right? This is like one of those eccentric billionaires who he doesn't know what to do with his life. I mean, you see these stories all the time, right? It's like these people have too much money, they don't know what to do with it, and so they just start spending all this money on stuff. Like Elvis.
Yeah.
Like I love Elvis. I've read way too many books on him. I've watched way too many movies about him. But it's because, to me, he's very similar to Solomon. Like, this dude skyrocketed to the top of the world, and he did not know how to handle it, right? His wife, Priscilla, said that she liked riding horses all of a sudden, so he bought a ranch. And not only did he buy a ranch, he bought a horse for her, for himself, and for all of his friends. He would just do it. And every now and then, he'd just give his friends new cars. And if you were to ever go to Graceland on any given weekend, there would be peacocks and monkeys and all sorts of stuff just running around, because why not? He's Elvis Presley. He can do what he wants. And it blows my mind. That's why Elvis is so interesting to me, because I'm like, what is it like? To me, he's a very recent example of this, right? To where this is a guy who just skyrocketed to fame, and he didn't know what to do with all of it. And he was just a guy he spent his whole life searching, right? He literally died on the toilet reading a book about the Shroud of Turin.
What?
Right?
Yeah.
He was always searching, but never arriving, right? It sounds like Solomon to me, right? I don't think Elvis was nearly as wise as Solomon at all, but there's parallels there, right? Especially in regards to the earthly success, right? I mean, Solomon, he's just importing apes and peacocks. Now, is this going to serve the people or the kingdom at all?
No.
Why is he doing this?
Well, I would guess to serve himself.
Yeah,
What he
there's only
wants.
3 words I'm looking for.
Because he can.
Because he can. That's it. He's doing it because he can. It doesn't serve anybody. Really, it doesn't even serve himself. Right? I mean, it entertains him. But once again, go to Ecclesiastes and you'll see that's what he admits. Yeah, I turned to entertainment, right? And I thought maybe this would serve me. But this too is meaningless, a chasing after wind. So what we see here is that he multiplies his wealth. Keep that in the back of your head, because we are going to, I'm already trying to highlight the issues behind this, but we're going to get to the heart of the issue once we cover all of these things together, right? Okay, so he multiplies his money. Next up, verses 23 through 29. Go for it.
So King Solomon became greater than all the kings of the earth, in riches and in wisdom. And all the earth was seeking the presence of Solomon, to hear his wisdom which God had put in his heart. And they brought every man his present, articles of silver and gold, garments, weapons, spices, horses, and mules, a set amount year by year. And Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen, and he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, and stationed them in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. The king also made silver as plentiful as stones in Jerusalem, and he made cedars as plentiful as sycamore trees that are in the Shephelah. Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Kue. The king's merchants procured them from Kue for a price. And a chariot was imported from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and a horse for 150. And by the same means they exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and to the kings of Aram.
Thank you. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was vanity. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly, until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven for the years of their lives. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers, and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and that is the reward of my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. That's what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes. That's what we see here, right? The phrase that breaks my heart the most is that he says, and in all of this, my wisdom remained with me.
Wow.
That's the thing that breaks his heart the most. Right? Well, that's what breaks my heart the most about what he says. Because he says, guys, it's not that wisdom left me. It's that wisdom wasn't sufficient. Here, whenever God had asked him, if there's anything I could give you, what would it be? He said, I want a hearing heart. I want a heart that hears you. And God gave him that. And because of his hearing heart, the Gentiles heard of God. That's what we saw with Sheba. But apparently a hearing heart is not enough if you're only hearing the ways of the world. You have to hear God, right? And that's the issue, right? Solomon's wisdom is with him, but he's not chasing God. So King Solomon became greater than all the kingdoms of the earth in riches and in wisdom, just like God promised. Right? God said, I will give you not only wisdom, but riches and fame and all that stuff. And he is greater than everybody in riches and in wisdom. So the author wants to make clear, it's not that his wisdom departed. His wisdom is there. His wisdom simply was not enough. And, was that?
No, I was just going to say, I was saying this earlier, but you reminded me again. Like, I guess if you want to think of it as almost like a word study, like a couple of words I'm thinking of that you really haven't heard since David is inquiring of the Lord, and also like Hesed too.
That's true. Yeah,
like
I didn't notice
you don't really see him like inquiring of God, just because you reminded me because of like you said like hearing God and stuff.
Yeah.
Like
I actually was thinking about that a second earlier whenever it said that he answered Sheba in regards to everything that she inquired of him. I didn't look to see if it's the same word, but it made me think of that because I was like, oh, we haven't heard of Solomon inquiring of God. But yeah, that's a good point. We get to see the difference between Solomon and David, right? In David's success, he wanted to give to others. In Solomon's success, he's just serving himself. And all the earth was seeking the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. So here he is. He's at the height of his success. Everything's going good. And it's not just Sheba who's seeking him out for wisdom. Other people are seeking him out for wisdom. And guess what? He is giving them good advice. Right? It's not like... So what we're seeing here is we are seeing Solomon's kingdom crumble. But it doesn't look like that. Right? From an earthly perspective, it looks like it's just growing higher and higher and higher. And the craziest thing about this is that as people are coming to Solomon, he is giving them genuine advice and genuine wisdom that comes from God. Right? This is one of those perplexing things, like where you can have somebody who is they are an amazing minister before God, but they have sin creeping up in their lives. And those two things paradoxically can go on at the same time. Right? I was talking about this just not this last Sunday, but the Sunday before. I pulled out my phone and there is a well-respected minister that has impacted me a whole lot. And I learned that he was having all these extramarital affairs and he was forced to resign from ministry. Well, a lot of the stuff that administered to me apparently came from him while he was doing all these extramarital things with other women. That's crazy. Because here you have this guy being used by God while embracing sin. That's what we see with Solomon here. His wisdom is still with him, paradoxically. And that is scary for all of us, right? We need to be aware of that because we need to be aware that if it can happen to Solomon, well, it also happened to his dad too, David. And if it can happen to David and Solomon, well, it can happen to all of us, right? So we need to be aware of this. All because you have a successful ministry, all because you're succeeding in life does not mean that you're being faithful to God, right? Those are two separate things. Success physically and success spiritually are distinct, right? And they can overlap, but they might not necessarily. So all the earth was seeking the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. Right? God put the wisdom there. And so he gave it to them. And they brought every man his present, articles of silver and gold, garments, weapons, spices, horses, and mules, a set amount each year by year. You see how even, he's giving them wisdom, but even through giving wisdom, it's producing folly. Because really, honestly, at this point, he has so much, he probably could turn down the gifts, right? He could probably say, you know what, I have enough, you keep that. I can just dispense this freely. But instead, they're giving the gifts, and this is going to produce his downfall. And Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. Right now, that might sound like a random detail, but one of y'all already alluded to why this is going to be significant, and I'm saving that for the end, that we can talk about this. But this is very significant if you've read the Torah. That's all I'll say for now, right? So he's multiplied money, and now he's multiplying chariots and horsemen. Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen, and he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, and stationed them in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. Now, why do you need that many? I mean, he's living at a time of peace. Is he doing this just in case, everything hits the fan and he has to, whip out an army? Maybe. But it doesn't, he's a wise guy. It doesn't seem like war's going to be breaking out anytime soon. So why is he multiplying horses and multiplying chariots? Same three words.
Because he can.
Because he can. Because he can.
He just feels like doing it.
Yeah. He's like, all right, well. But you can see how as a king he justify it. Right? Well, now that we've established the kingdom, it's time to show our power. You know what? To show off our power, if you'll notice, what Israel's doing is it is becoming more like other nations. It is greater than other nations, but it's becoming more worldly. How do they demonstrate their power? What if we had gold shields hanging on the walls? What if we had walls lined with gold? What if we drank from golden vessels? How else do we demonstrate our power? What if we had a huge military? That's what other nations do. That's not what they were meant to do. But he's beginning to think like other nations. And he has the resources to pull it off better than the other nations could. The king also made silver as plentiful as stones in Jerusalem. And he made cedars as plentiful as sycamore trees that are in the Shephelah. Ben and I went to Israel back in February. Ben, would you say that there's a lot of stones in Israel?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like,
It's been a while.
there's a lot of stones in Israel,
Remember?
right? That's why it's so funny whenever Jesus is riding into Jerusalem and they're saying, hey, sir, please tell your people to be quiet. And he says, if they shut up, then the stones themselves will cry out. He's like, guys, there's stones everywhere, right? Like, you go to Israel, there are a lot of stones. And right here it says, the king made silver as plentiful as stones. That's why they didn't really need it, right? Because there was so much gold, that's what they were using. But in addition to gold, there was even more silver. And you go to Ecclesiastes, what did it say? I gathered gold and silver. There you go. It's as plentiful as stones. Cedars as plentiful as sycamore trees that are in the Shephelah. There's abundance, right? Everywhere, right? There's just almost too much. Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Kue. The king's merchants procured them from Kue for a price. Where did he get the horses from?
Egypt.
Egypt. That's going to be significant later. Just remember that. Horses from Egypt. And a chariot was imported from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. And by the same means, they exported them to the kings of the Hittites and to the kings of Aram. Who are the Hittites?
Enemies.
Enemies.
They were one of the enemies that Israel.
Yeah. They're some of the Canaanites. Hittites are some of the Canaanites that Israelites couldn't totally kick out. Right? Uriah was a Hittite. But do you know, like what's Solomon doing here?
Equipping them.
He's giving soldiers and armies to the enemy. Right? And then Aram is what we would call modern day Syria. Right? This is where like Damascus is at and stuff like that. It's just north of Israel. Well, in a few centuries, these guys, or well, not even a few centuries, in a few decades, these people are going to end up being some of the key enemies of Israel. And Solomon is funding their army.
Why would he do that?
This is with wisdom. Right? Well, it's because he can. Right? He's like, I've got excess here. He's probably trying to make, like, he's trying to make peace. Right? Here's some armies. Here's some horses and stuff. But he's funding the enemy. Right? Sometimes wise people can do some really stupid stuff. So he multiplies money. He multiplies horses. Let's go into chapter 11 and let's read these final 8 verses.
Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which Yahweh had said to the sons of Israel, You shall not go along with them, nor shall they go along with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. Now it happened at the time that Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to Yahweh his God, as the heart of David his father had been. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. And Solomon did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and did not follow Yahweh fully, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Thus also he did for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods.
Downfall.
Boom. So this is one of those places where if you hadn't read the Torah, it would catch you by surprise. But if you've read the Torah, and if you know the Torah, these verses are saying the same things that the previous verses said. But if you haven't read the Torah, all the previous verses look like Solomon's kingdom is expanding and getting better. Right? I've tried to highlight the issues, but if you just look at them from a worldly perspective, all the previous verses we've looked at are good things. Right? I mean, who wouldn't want to live in a kingdom where there's so much gold that you can drink from it? Who wouldn't want to live in a kingdom where silver is as bountiful as stones? Who wouldn't want to live in a kingdom where cedars are as bountiful as sycamore trees? Who wouldn't want to live in a kingdom where you have an army that is well established and there's just a huge army where you never have to worry a day in your life? Who wouldn't want to live in a kingdom that is so confident in how well off they are that they don't mind giving soldiers to the enemy. Who wouldn't want to live there? But then you get to chapter 11 and you read these 8 verses and you're like, whoa, what changed? Well, anybody who's read the Torah realizes nothing has changed. What you read in verses 1 through 8 of chapter 11 are the same thing that you read in the previous verses. You just realize the issue right here, right? I think the author was very meticulous, it was intentional in how they listed these issues, right? He multiplied money and he multiplied chariots, he multiplied women. Well, everybody sees how multiplying women is an issue, especially because right here you see that it turns them away from God. But not everybody sees how the first 2 things are issues, right? The first 2 things are things that we love to do, right? We want to have a lot of money. We want to be well defended, right? I mean, think about that. That's like what America stands for, right? It's the land of the free, home of the brave, right? It is the place where, it's the American dream, right? This is where you come if you want to, make a name for yourself and you want to succeed and prosper, right? Our whole thing is prosperity and military. Well, we look at the end of chapter 10 and we're like, yes, now this is a utopia. This is a good kingdom. But if you read the Torah, you realize those are 2 big red flags. And I would argue that if you read just chapter 10 and you know the Torah, you don't even have to read verses 1 through 8 of chapter 11 because you already know what's going to happen. But the author puts it here just so that you realize that what God promised in the Torah is true. So what we're going to do is we're going to analyze this. We're going to go a little bit over time today, just so y'all know. We're going to analyze this, and then I want to close off by going back to the Torah and seeing what God promised. Right? Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women along with the daughter of Pharaoh. So we've talked about the daughter of Pharaoh several times, right? He married her back in chapter 3, and then she was mentioned again, was it last chapter?
Yeah.
Okay, last week, right? Chapter 9. But that apparently was not his only wife. He loved many foreign women. And he probably had a bunch of non-foreign women as well. But notice what it says. It doesn't say now King Solomon had many political alliances with foreign women, even though that was probably true as well. What does it say? Now King Solomon loved many foreign
Almost
women.
like chasing after almost.
He's chasing after them, right? This is not simply a political alliance issue, right? Even though that was definitely probably a big component of it. But a lot of times I'll hear people they'll emphasize, oh, well, these were political alliances. That was probably how he justified it. But that's not how the author views it. He loved them, right? Is it because he loved what they could give to him? Maybe. Or maybe he loved them for the same reason he loved apes and peacocks and ivory and cedars. It's because they were different and foreign. And this is a guy who is searching, right? He couldn't find contentment in Israel, and so now he's going beyond. And he says, all right, I've got Pharaoh's daughter. Let's get some more. And so he loved many foreign women along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. Moabite and Ammonite, who are those descended from?
Moab is Moabite.
Yeah, well, they're from Moab and Ammon, but
Was it
Lot. Yes, very good. I'm just testing your biblical theology here, or history. Yeah, so Moab and Ammon come from Lot, Abraham's nephew, right? Edomite, who does that come from? Esau, right? The brother of Jacob, right? So Esau's other name was Edom, and so the Edomites come from Esau, right? So in addition to loving Egyptian women, he loved Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, right? Hiram was king of Tyre, and a city very close to Tyre is Sidon. Well, he loved the Sidonian women too. And then the Hittite women, well, those were just a little further north. He loved them too, right? All around, right? It's literally so Egypt is to the south, and then Moab and Ammon and Edom, those are all over to the east. And then you get to Sidonian and Hittite to the north. So the only place where he wasn't going for women was in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Right? So we don't know if he loved mermaids or not, but where there was land, there were women for Solomon to like. Right? That's the idea. Everywhere he looked, he loved the women. From the nations concerning which Yahweh had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not go along with them, nor shall they go along with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods. Now there's several reasons why they shouldn't go after these women. Right? First off, because polygamy is bad. Right? But why specifically did God warn them against these women in particular?
they're foreign nations. They're not.
But why is that? Like, does God just not like interracial couples?
No.
No, God, like, I just want to clarify that. God, it's not that God has an issue with interracial couples. There's a different reason.
Oh, because they don't worship Yahweh, and so
Yeah.
if you're like intermingling those two people, they can kind of like infiltrate your religion, and then you're gonna turn away from God because they don't worship the same person as you. You're not
Yeah.
like equally yoked.
Exactly. Right? God has no problem with a Moabite if the Moabite worships Yahweh. You know how I know that? Ruth. Right? Solomon's great-great-grandmother. Right? Ruth was a Moabite who came to worship Yahweh. And she became the great-grandmother, or the grandmother of David. Right? Well, that's Solomon's great-grandmother. She was a Moabite. There's no problem with that. The issue is that that's not the woman Solomon loves. It's not like he's being like, all right, if you want to be with me, you got to worship Yahweh. No. And just as a word of advice, you should not do that either. Right? I have so many, like, my high schoolers drive me nuts sometimes. There's been this thing lately where they, I'm grateful they do this. They've been coming to me for relationship advice. Right? Like during like lunch or during my off periods and stuff, they'll come and like ask me for advice. And God bless their souls. I mean, I remember being in high school and stuff like that. But a lot of them, they'll be like, oh, well, yeah, this person's not a Christian, but like, I don't know. I'm hoping that like I can be a good influence on them. I'm like, no, stop. Don't do it. Don't evangelate. It's not, that's what they call it, right? Evangelism, evangelidating, right? Oh, well, I'm going to bring them to Christ. No, you're not, right? That's not how it works, right? Gravity works in a downwards direction, right? It's easier to pull somebody down, right? In all likelihood, you're not going to make them a Christian. They are going to influence you in the other direction. God is aware of that here as well, right? He says, you're not supposed to intermingle with these women. First off, because it's bad, but the main issue he has is that they're going to turn you away from him, right? It's almost like he's willing to forgive the polygamy. It's the worshiping other gods thing that he's concerned about, right? I mean, David multiplied wives, and remember the whole David and Bathsheba situation? Whenever Nathan confronts David, Nathan says, David, God has given you everything that you've ever wanted, and he would have given you more, right? Like the way that Nathan's talking, he's like, David, if you wanted more wives, you could have just asked God, and he would have given you more wives. Why'd you take Bathsheba, though? Right? And so it's almost like God is willing to forgive the polygamy thing. It's the issue, like, he doesn't want you to turn away from God, right? Once again, I'm not making light of polygamy. Don't do it. But I'm saying that of the two things, we're seeing that God values, like, he would almost rather them just be polygamous with a bunch of Israelites than chase after a single foreign woman. Because the foreign woman is going to lead them away from God, right?
Have been Judges.
Well, exactly. Yes, yeah. We have a precedent for this, right? Solomon is reliving the Judges story, which is bad because we know where that story heads. So God said, "You shall not go along with them, nor shall they go along with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods." God prophesied this. He said, he didn't say they might. He said they will do it. Like they will turn your heart away. But Solomon, what did he do? He clung to these in love. It doesn't say that he simply pursued them for political alliances. He clung to them. He lusted after them. He couldn't get enough of them. Ooh, a Hittite woman. I haven't had a Hittite woman before, but I'd like to. He clung to them, right? He longed for them. This is a guy who, he's being driven by desire, right? I desire gold shields. I'll have gold shields. I desire peacocks. Bring in the peacocks. I want a throne made of ivory, but I want you to cover it with gold. Let's do it. And I want there to be 12 lions. All right, 12 lions it'll be. This is what this guy is. He's a guy who literally has access to everything, and so he pursues everything. And he had, this is crazy, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. Can you imagine? Like, this is one of those verses, I don't care how many times I've read it, I cannot wrap my mind around this. 700 wives, 300 concubines. That's 1,000 women. 1,000 marriage ceremonies. I mean, how does it even work? How did the guy have time for this?
It's 20 years max.
Yes. Right, this is wild. I don't know. Like, I genuinely do not know how he pulled this off. Right? 700 wives, 300 concubines. Right? So the 700 wives, that means that they were probably of more royal standing and meriting being wives. The 300 concubines, this is just pure lust, right? There is no political advantage to this whatsoever. These are simply side women that he took in. And keep in mind, he's probably ruining their lives, right? Because do you think that these women have a healthy home life? No. Because he's probably making a lot of babies, but a lot of these kids are going to grow up without a dad. Because can Solomon be a king, like a father to 1,000 kids? No. Can he be a husband to 1,000 women? No. You're made to be a husband to one wife, right? One wife. And it's hard enough to raise one kid. Solomon's got 1,000 wives. Who knows how many kids he has? And for all we know, he's probably sleeping with a bunch of other women too, right? Ones that he didn't even marry. This is wild. Like, it's hard to wrap your mind around this because it's just so excessive. But this is where you really begin to realize, oh crud, this is an issue. And if this is where you're first beginning to see the issue, then you need to read the Torah again. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. Just like God said. Even the wisest man was not exempt. Now it happened at the time that Solomon was old. His wives turned his heart away after other gods. And his heart was not wholly devoted to Yahweh his God as the heart of his David his father had been. This is what God warns him about in chapter 9. He said, Solomon, sin is crouching at your door. You got to rule over it. You finish the temple. Don't mess up. And what Solomon go do? Multiply his money, multiply his horses, multiply his wives. And now his heart is no longer following Yahweh. Wisest man in the world, at the height of his wisdom, embraces folly. What's that?
He finished the temple, but he didn't finish the race well.
Exactly, right? Yeah. He finished the task, but did not finish the race. Yeah. It's like running a 5K, and he set a mile PR, but the rest of his 5K was horrible. It's like, good job. You started well, you did not finish well. First, and once again, the comparison, it says, as the heart of David his father had been. How was David's heart wholly devoted to Yahweh? It's not saying that David's heart was perfect, and it's not saying that David was perfect. It's saying that he never worshipped any other gods, right? That's the key, right? It's kind of like being faithful to a spouse, right? It's not that you're a perfect person. It's that whenever you're not perfect, you apologize, and your eyes are only for your spouse. That's it, right? You're not looking this way and that. Solomon, he embraced it, and he looked this way and that. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. Why is that? Well, because he liked Sidonian women and Ammonite women. And Solomon did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and did not follow Yahweh fully as David, his father, had done. Why is that repeated?
Because David is the kind of king that God was looking for. He came back to God even though he sinned.
Yeah. It's to emphasize the heartbreak, right? Because we don't need it repeated again. He's already said it. But the author emphasizes it. He turned away. He did what was wrong in the eyes of God. He was not like David. This is so sad, right? I mean, just 2 chapters ago, this dude was dedicating the temple, and he gave the most amazing prayer. He gave a prayer so amazing. David never gave a prayer like that. But apparently it's not just about what you can accomplish, right? It's not about this amazing big show, right? It's about the heart, right? I desire, like Hinei Shema Misebach Tob. Behold, to hear is better than to sacrifice. Solomon sacrificed like crazy, right? He gave so many sacrifices that they stopped counting the number of them. But he did not hear, right? He had a hearing heart to discern the ways of the world, but he did not listen to God, right? If he had heard the Torah, he would have obeyed. Had he listened whenever God warned him, he would have obeyed. But he didn't, right? There's a difference between listening and hearing, right? God's warning went in one ear, out the other. God's commands in the Torah went in one ear, out the other. Hearing should lead to obedience. Solomon did not do it. So it's heartbreaking, right? He's not like David. He looked pretty good at first. He looked really messianic, but he's not the Messiah. He's no David. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem. Anybody know what mountain is east of Jerusalem? We call it a mountain. It's really a hill, but
Moriah?
Mount of Olives.
Mount of Olives. Yeah, we were
Yeah,
there.
Mount of Olives. This is where Bethany's at. This is where Jesus is going to, where he rides in from triumphal entry. This is where Jesus ascends to heaven, right? This is where Jesus is going to return.
Amen.
But Solomon, he built an idol there. So you've got the temple of God right here, and right across the Kidron Valley, an idol, a detestable idol, on the mountain which east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Do y'all know anything about Molech? This is bad stuff.
Is that the one that makes you sacrifice like children?
Yep. Yeah, Molech is the child, like the one where you worship him by sacrificing children. Right? Basically, like we have evidence of this. Like it's a huge old statue. Like you can go look it up online. Like there's a lot of artist renderings of it, and I think we've actually found evidence of like examples of it. Basically, what they would do is like this huge like there's different types. Like some of them were like really big, and they were like furnaces, right? And they would heat it up, and they would throw the kid into the furnace to burn them as a way of like praying. Okay, well we're sacrificing our child so that God can bless our families, right? We've given up something to the gods so that the gods can give something to us. Another way that it would work is that there were some statues where it's like it would have like arms outstretched like this, and they would heat it up on the inside so that the metal got super hot, and then they would place the child into the arms so that the white hot metal would like burn the child. It's bad. God, and like think about that, right? Over here you have this temple built to a holy God, and across the valley you've got an altar for child sacrifice.
Sad.
All because he loved foreign women. And again, the emphasis is not on them being foreign. The emphasis is on them being pagan foreign women. Right? The reason they're called foreign is because they have not converted to Yahweh worship. Right? He loves Sidonians, so he worships Ashtoreth. He loves Ammonites, so he worships Milcom. He loves Moabites, so he worships Chemosh. He loves Ammonites, so he worships Molech. Thus also he did for all his foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Just like God promised. We're going to stop there, but what I want to do is, before we actually pray and finish up, let's go back to Deuteronomy. I think it was Rocky who mentioned this before. But it just so happens that everything we read about here is mentioned in Deuteronomy. If you go to chapter 17. So, according to God's original design for Israel, who was supposed to be their king? God, Yahweh. Right? They weren't supposed to have a human king. Right? God was supposed to be the king. And we've talked about how difficult it is now that they have a king, because it's hard to define exactly what the king's job is. Which is probably a big problem for what King like Solomon was going through here, right? Solomon built the temple, and now that he's done with the temple, he doesn't know what to do. Because what is his job, right? There was never supposed to be a human king. But back in Deuteronomy, before Moses even died, he knew that the people of Israel were going to choose to appoint a king over themselves. And the reason they were going to choose to appoint a king over themselves is because they wanted to be like the nations. Which is ironic, because what is the whole purpose of Israel? Like, if you were to summarize God's calling of the people of Israel in one word, what would it be?
Be set apart.
Holy, yes, which means to be set apart, right? They're called to be holy, which means to be set apart from the nations. Yet Moses knows, even before he dies, even before they've entered the land, he says, I know you're going to want to be like the nations. So they're going to fail at their one job. And this is what we read in Deuteronomy chapter 17, starting verse 14. When you enter the land which Yahweh your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like the nations who are around me, you shall surely set a king over you whom Yahweh your God chooses. One from among your countrymen you shall set as king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. So the first thing is that God has to pick him. Well, so far so good, right? God picked Saul, God picked David, God picked Solomon. So not only does God have to pick them, but they have to be from Israel. They can't be foreigners. Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. David and Solomon from the tribe of Judah. So far, so good. But then notice what it says. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since Yahweh has said to you, you shall never again return that way. He shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away, nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself. What are the three things that the king's not supposed to multiply? Horses and chariots, wives, silver and gold. That's why I'm saying if you read the Torah, you don't even need these first 8 verses of chapter 11 because you already know where this is heading. Because you've seen him multiply silver and gold, and you've seen him multiply horses and chariots, and you're like, all right, women are coming next. So you already knew where this was heading. But real quick, I do want to read the rest of this in a second, but why is it that God tells them not to multiply these things? Let's walk through it. Why are they not allowed to multiply money? Why are they not supposed to multiply silver and gold?
Because it'll take away from God.
It takes away from God. Well, how does it take away from God? I mean, does God need the money?
No.
Who does it really take away from?
Like the people?
The people, right? Because usually, like, why is it that a king usually multiplies silver and gold?
He wants to be rich.
Yeah, he's using his authority to serve himself, right? Whereas a good, like, it wasn't a bad thing whenever Solomon had all that gold and he was using it for the temple of God or to help the kingdom. But multiplying silver and gold implies that you're storing it up for yourself. And you don't actually need it, you just want it. So that's what other kings do, right? They just multiply money because they're in authority and they can do that. They can tax the people. They can do all these other things, right? Every time Solomon is shipping things in from outside places, it's the people who are getting taxed to pay for that shipment, right? It's not like he's multiplying the money for himself and he's taxing the other people to fund all these projects. So he's serving himself. So other kingdoms, they might multiply those things. You are not called to. Because a king in Israel is supposed to be a servant, right? This is the biblical theology of authority, right? Authority is not something that you use for yourself. Authority is something that you bear for others, right? And so if you're multiplying money, you're not serving others, you're serving yourself. So you're not supposed to multiply money. Why are they not supposed to multiply horses and chariots? Army. But why are they not supposed to have a big army?
God's supposed to fight for them if they're ever needing to go into battle.
Exactly, right? Think about the book of Judges, right? A recurring issue is that their army was too big, right? Remember Gideon? Gideon gets this whole group together, and God's like, no, we need less. And he's like, how about this? And he's like, no, we still need less. God wants them to have an average army. Because if they have a huge army, and they're winning all their battles, who are they going to think is responsible? Themselves. God doesn't want them to think it's themselves. And he doesn't want the Gentiles to think it's them either. God wants to get the glory out of this because he wants to bring all people to himself. And so he doesn't want them to have a bunch of horses and chariots. He wants them to have just enough. Right? He wants them to have, if anything, a small army. So that they can go out and they can fight battles. And when they win, it is no doubt that God's the one who gave them the victory. They know it and the Gentiles know it. If they have a huge army, well, it could be that it was God, or it could just be that they had a really good army. God doesn't want them to multiply horses and chariots because he wants them to trust him. Okay? Why aren't they supposed to multiply women?
Because it takes away from God.
Yeah, well, it'll lead them astray. Right? I mean, also, there's the whole polygamy is bad thing, but that's not the thing that's emphasized here. It's the fact that the women will lead you away from God. Right? That's the issue. Right? If Israel exists to point people towards God, then they should be taking the foreigners and bringing them to God. But if the kings are going out and marrying the foreigners, well, then it's not them bringing the foreigners to God, it's the foreigners who are going to bring them away from God. Because to be fair, Solomon, he's being driven by lust. But most kings, if they're marrying foreign women, why are they marrying them usually? I've already talked about this a little bit. What would be the main reason you would marry a foreign woman? Yeah, peace, a political alliance, right? If I marry Pharaoh's daughter, then Pharaoh's daughter is now part of my family, which means that Pharaoh is part of my family, and it's a lot less likely that Pharaoh is going to attack me whenever his daughter's living with me, right? He's not going to attack family, right? So a lot of times they would marry foreign women in order to strike a political alliance. I imagine that's how Solomon justified a lot of these, right? It says 700 of them were princesses. He's probably marrying a woman from each city. Okay, well, that's how it starts, but the issue is, if you really want to institute peace, well, you've got to make her feel comfortable whenever she comes and lives with you. And it's not like she worships Yahweh, right? Pharaoh's daughter probably worships the gods of Egypt. All right, well, I want her to feel at home here, and her dad's not going to be happy with me if I make her abandon the religion she grew up with. So what I'll do is I'll build a temple for the Egyptian gods over there. I mean, I won't worship those temples, but I'll build them for her. Oh no, she came home and she's griping at me today. How do I make her happy? Maybe I'll go to her with the temple. I'll go with her to the temple, right? So all of a sudden you're building all these temples and you're building these idols for the women, and you're probably not intending to worship them, but inevitably their culture starts drawing you in, right? And for some reason or another, you end up doing it. That's what God told them to stray away from, right? So they're not supposed to multiply money. They're not supposed to multiply horses. They're not supposed to multiply women. Solomon does all three of those. And the author highlights all three of those because he wants you to know where this story is heading. We're going to go from the best of the best to the worst of the worst. To close this out, let me actually show you what Solomon was supposed to do. Now it shall come about when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law or scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. So when the king sits on the throne, he's supposed to write down the Torah. He's supposed to make a personal copy for himself, basically to keep at his bedside. So he always has access to the Torah, so he knows it front and back. And he does it in front of the Levitical priests, so they can make sure he didn't change anything, and so they can hold him accountable, right? Because if they see him writing it down, they know for a fact that he has read it. It shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear Yahweh his God by carefully observing all the words of this law and these statutes, that his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right or to the left, so that he and his sons may continue long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel. So the reason why he does this is so that he and the sons may continue long in Israel, because he follows the Torah. So if you have a king, God's got to choose him. He's got to be from Israel. He cannot multiply women. He cannot multiply money. He cannot multiply horses and chariots. And he has to live according to the law, which includes all three of those things. Solomon abandons all of that. And he does it at the height of his wisdom. I'm going to close this off with a little quote from our friend Peter Leithart. I've been quoting his commentary every now and then because he has some good stuff to say. This is what he says. The Book of Kings is, among other things, wisdom literature, and the life of Solomon demonstrates that wisdom does not allow the wise to rest on their laurels and coast through life. Wisdom requires guarding one's steps, and the wiser one is, the more skilled one is, the more paths are open and the more options. Folly is a function of power, and power is often the product of skill. The wise can accomplish things that a fool cannot, and this means that the wise faces peculiar temptations that are simply not available to the fool. Humans rightly strive for wisdom, strive above all to get wisdom, but there is a kind of skill in living that is no more than a highly refined form of folly. In the larger scheme of 1st and 2nd Kings, Solomon's failure is nestled within a story of Israel's failure. Successful as he is, Solomon does not bring in a perpetual golden age. Human wisdom cannot bring in salvation for a fallen Israel or a fallen humanity. That can only be done through God's wisdom in flesh, a wisdom that confounds the wisdom of the wise, a wisdom that looks for all the world like folly. So, the main thing I want to highlight here is, once again, this whole story is pointing to the fact that Solomon, as great as he was, he's not Jesus. Right? That's really the main point. Right? If there was anybody who could have established the kingdom of God, it would be Solomon. Yet, when you see Solomon at the height of his power, he is still just as human as everybody else. Right? I mean, you're like, he's literally been given everything, and he turns away from God. I'm hoping that at the end of his life, Solomon repented. If Ecclesiastes was written after the events of chapter 11 right here, then I think that's good. But we don't know, right? 1 Kings is not going to tell us that Solomon repented. By the end of next week, we're going to talk about the rest of chapter 11, and we're going to see Solomon dies, and it's not going to mention any repentance. But I pray that he did. But we don't know. Do y'all have any final things y'all want to share? We've kind of talked about application along the way. I feel like you could actually spend another hour talking about application. But is there anything y'all want to mention before we wrap up?
Be careful to stay on the straight and narrow. The narrow path that leads to life.
Yeah.
Don't turn to the right or to the left.
Yep. The story of Solomon's been something that's always kind of sobered me up a little bit. Whenever I pray, I don't pray just for wisdom. I pray for both wisdom and the will to apply it. Because wisdom is not enough, right? Wisdom is good for guiding a people, but you don't just need to guide the people. You need to also be guided yourself, right? And so you need wisdom to obey that wisdom, right? Because the thing is, I think Solomon knew better, right? I know for a fact he knew better because I can guarantee you, if any other person came to him and asked him whether these things were wise, he would have probably told him no. But there's this thing that confounds us whenever our own personal desires get in the way, right? There have been times where, like, people come to me for advice and they'll ask something, and I will give them advice. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been struggling with that same exact thing, and I have been wrestling through it for like weeks, and it was so simple whenever somebody else came to me and asked about it. Whenever your own desires aren't getting in the way, it's very easy, or it's easier to discern the answer. But whenever personal desires get in the way, all of a sudden things get cloudy, right? So Solomon's wisdom is with him, and he's advising everybody else, while he himself is just on like a direct course to folly. Don't be like Solomon, right? Pray for a hearing heart, not only that you can hear the hearts of the people, and that you can hear what God's heart is for them, but that you will also hear and respond to God's heart with obedience in your own life, right? That's what we really need to do. Anything else?
I was going to say, it reminds me of like what Paul says in 1 Corinthians, like, let every man take heed lest, or who thinks he stands, take heed lest he fall. Like, was it no, I forget. It's like, no things like no temptation that you have is like, it's all common to man.
Yeah. No temptation has overtaken you, which is common. I know what you're referring to. But
Yeah.
my mind's tired. But yeah.
We're not as strong as we think we are.
Exactly. Yeah, that Rich Mullins song. I feel like I'm quoting myself that all the time.
We are fearfully
Yeah.
and wonderfully.
It took the hand of God Almighty to part the waters in the sea, but it only took one little line to separate you and me. We are not as strong as we think we are.
And he is also, like, I mean, it's not really application, but he's still kind of fulfilling with the thing that Samuel told the people too.
He's taking.
He's taking.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, let this be a warning to us that even if God has shown up and literally told you, watch out for what you're doing, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to listen to him. Right? I mean, like, think about how much nowadays people, like, especially like skeptics, they're like, if God showed up right now and he told me like he existed, I would listen. God literally showed up to Solomon and said, Solomon, don't do what you're about to do. And Solomon's like, I'm going to do it anyways. Right? Like, this is the hardness of our human hearts. Right? We just have to be aware of that. Yeah. Honestly, just verses 1 through 8, I feel like we could cover that for like 3 hours. We're not going to. But this whole thing is so heartbreaking. And I hope you understand why I wanted to cover through verse 8. Because where it splits between chapters 10 and 11 is kind of unfortunate, because you really have to have the money, horses, women thing all together in order to really get the message, right? Yeah. If anything, I would have rather treated the Sheba thing as like a separate. But all right, would one of y'all close us out in prayer, please? Unless anybody else has something to share. I'll do it. Lord, we praise you, and I pray that God, I hope that our hearts will be stirred up by what we've read today. I hope that these moments right here as I'm praying are not the last moments that we think about this passage in this week, but that as we go about the rest of our week, we'll be examining our own hearts, God, and we'll be seeing if there's any places where we are doing what Solomon has done. We might not have as much gold as he did, and we might not have all the peacocks and apes and foreign women that he did, But you know what, God? We are more like Solomon than probably any other people on the face of the planet have been. Right? I mean, we have so much more. I mean, Solomon never had air conditioning. Solomon never had the internet. Solomon never had electricity. Solomon still had to send people to go fetch water from a well. God, we have so much. And as a result, it is so easy to be distracted and tempted, and all of us need to take heed lest we fall. Right? Because it's so easy to direct our righteous activities towards other people, and it's so easy to act righteous, and it's so easy to do big things in your name, God, but really what you're asking of us is faithfulness. So help us be faithful, God. Help us live for you, and help us find all the equivalents to the money and the women and the armies in our own lives, and let us serve you, God. Help us not multiply money, lest we serve ourselves rather than serve others. Let us not multiply horses and chariots, lest we learn to trust in ourselves rather than trust in you. And let us not marry the pagan foreign women, lest we give ourselves any opportunity to stray from you. Rather, let us serve others, let us trust you, and let us worship you only. We love you, God. We thank you for your words. In your name we pray. Amen.